Sorry if you can hear the building work happening behind me.
That's all right. I'm actually in a conference in London.
Hopefully this will be more entertaining.
Well, that's what I figured, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for coming to this week's seminar. We're really excited today to have a seminar from John Howell. So just before we begin, just a quick overview of the structure. So there'll be around a 40-minute presentation, so please keep your mics muted during the talk. And then the talk is also being recorded at the moment and live streamed on YouTube. We'll have time for around 10 to 15 minutes questions at the end. So if you're on Zoom, please use the raise hand function and we'll come to you. Or you can type it in the chat if you prefer. And if you're watching on YouTube, type it on the YouTube chat as well, and we can ask those questions on your behalf. I've just added a link to the seminar schedule for the remaining of the semester and the link to our YouTube and Twitter where the recordings are placed and all the seminars are advertised on our Twitter. So now I'll hand over to John Kavanagh, who is introducing our speaker for today.
Okay, so today we've got John Howell. I think it's fair to say that John Howell's one of the biggest inspirational people that I've ever met, and it's certainly piqued my interest in sedimentology from mere humble sed lab technician to actually getting my name on some papers. So with no further ado, John graduated from the University of Wales in 1988. He went on to do a PhD at Birmingham, looking at the southern North Sea and the rock ligendas with the Aeolian sediments there, which is a source of gas for the UK. He came to Liverpool in 1992, working with Steve Flint and the Strat Group, and he's basically been all over the world with that sort of thing. So Buck Cliffs in Utah, Nauken in Argentina, the Etendeka in Namibia, and the Karoo in South Africa. The Etendeka work certainly was one of the most interesting things that I've been to talks on, with looking at the interaction between basalt lava flows and the Aeolian sediments there. That's some of the most interesting things I've ever had the pleasure to listen to some talks on. While at Liverpool, John also became a teacher, and he went on to win a Pilkington Award, was it, John?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So for research-led teaching. And in 1997, that's unfortunately when I met John, and he subsequently dragged me around large areas of Utah and South Africa, usually in the back of a four-wheel drive of some description. And then later on, for pleasure, you then took me around large amounts of Derbyshire in the back of a four-wheel drive for even more pleasurable experiences. And I think I don't know who ended up paying more for their bits and pieces on their Land Rovers. I have to say I certainly wrote my Land Rover off having fun. So in 2002, John moved to Norway to avoid paying for bits of Land Rover. He became professor of geology at Bergen, where I think you were doing reservoir modeling.
That's right, yeah.
With bits of Lego.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
More innovative teaching style there, and set up VOG, which I guess is the Virtual Outcrop group. And just for fun, founded your own oil company as well. I think in 2012, you moved back to Aberdeen to become professor of virtual geoscience, and you still collaborate with Bergen and industry with virtual outcrop techniques. The other thing that John has done is an awful lot of outreach. So it would be remiss of me to remind him of the times where he was dangled off cliffs by Channel 4's Big Monster Dig, looking for dinosaurs. Latterly flying drones into volcanoes with Dougal Jerram, and most recently of all, talking about Scotland's oil in the 1,000 years of Scottish history that was on television recently. So with no further ado, John, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. I'm not sure I can follow that. But, right. Okay. Where am I? Which slide? Let's just share the screen. Okay. Right. So what I'm going to do is, yeah, as John says, I'm going to talk about virtual outcrops and also virtual field trips, and I'm going to do half of it in PowerPoint. Just a traditional talk, but I'm also going to take you on a brief virtual field trip to Utah to give you a kind of flavor for some of the stuff that we've been doing, and to sort of give you a little bit of sort of more of a feel for what we're actually talking about. So basically, yeah, so it's a talk in two halves. We'll introduce the idea of what virtual outcrops and virtual field trips actually are. I'm going to talk a little bit about a site we set up for science outreach called V3Geo, and I'll just show you that very quickly, and then you're sort of free to go and explore that in your own time. And then I'm going to talk about virtual field trips, and that's going to be the bulk of the talk. And I'm going to take you on a short virtual field trip to Utah, and then I'm going to show you a little bit of research we've done recently, which is in using our master's students in Aberdeen as guinea pigs to actually sort of try to investigate that classic question of, you know, how do virtual field trips actually compare to real field trips, and it can't possibly be as good, you know, not going to the field and all that sort of stuff. So we'll actually look at some information, and we'll discuss, you know, what we've learned about how people interact with these things and what works and maybe what doesn't work. So first of all, you know, what is a virtual outcrop? Basically, these all look like pic photographs of cliffs, but actually they are all 3D models. And basically a virtual outcrop is a 3D, and I think most people probably know this now, but a virtual outcrop is a 3D representation of the cliff in which every pixel is accurately spatially constrained. So basically we can then go and look at these sections of cliff from Utah or Lowworth Cove or Somerset or Spain or whatever it is, and we can actually go and fly around the cliffs, and we can interact with them, we can make measurements on them. You know, this is a 300-meter high cliff, so we can go up here and we can measure these these sandstone cliffs, and we can measure the bodies, we can extract the fault geometries, we can do all the sorts of things we would do in the field, but potentially we can do it much faster, much safer, and much more accurately. So basically, they have a wide variety of uses, and the use I'm going to focus on today is very much around how do we use them for virtual training, which has obviously become very topical in the last sort of 2 years or so. So a little bit of history. This is a very young John Kavanagh stood there. In 1999, we started kind of working with digital geology, and it was about the first time that the GPS actually, you know, it's hard to imagine a world these days without GPS, but, you know, back in the mid-90s, or back in the early 90s, Steve Flint, who was he was in Liverpool, he basically handed me a GPS and said, use this in Utah, and it was basically the size of a breeze block, and it used about 50 batteries, and the batteries ran out, and it was pretty much inaccurate by within about 150 meters. So I immediately just stopped using it. But then by about 1999, you know, with these differential GPS systems, this is the first time we really sort of got into using this kind of kit properly. And the idea here was very much that we would just literally set up a base station and have the differential GPS, it's a real-time system, and then basically one of us would sort of wander around the hillsides, tracing beds and clicking to actually sort of map out the beds. And that was the first proper digital mapping that I was ever involved in. The first kind of virtual outcrops I ever saw came from a guy called Carlos Aitken, and from the University of Texas in Dallas. And they basically they took a total station, just like the surveyors used by the side of the road to measure distances and things. They built a robotic mount for it, and they used to shoot it at the cliffs, and they could record position. So whereas here, you could only record positions as quickly as you could walk, they could record sort of a point every 5 or 10 seconds. So they were actually able to sort of map the cliffs with this total station. And I thought this was really quite cool, but it was also sort of still very time consuming. And then everything changed in the early 2000s, because, or around 2004, we got our first Lidar system. And LiDAR again now is, I mean, literally the iPhone 12 has a LiDAR system built into it. But back then, this LiDAR cost about £150,000, and it also shot lasers at the cliffs, but it did it at the stunning 10,000 points a second, which is even now is still kind of pretty amazing. Modern LiDAR systems are shooting at sort of 1 million points a second. So that's even more amazing. But basically, this thing was shooting 10,000 points a second. Every time the laser beam hit the cliff, it records the position of that point, and it creates a massive cloud of points, which you can then turn into a virtual outcrop. And you combine it with, it's got a little camera on top of it here, sitting on top of it that, oh, my pointer, yeah, let's see if I can get a better pointer. There we are. That's it. It's got a camera sitting on top of it and a GPS, and basically you combine all of that to build a virtual outcrop. So that was when we first really started working with virtual outcrops. And then to cut a kind of long story short, 2011 we started working with drones, and drones basically. This was the first drone we ever built, and it was not very good. We literally had to sort of buy the bits and build it ourselves, and we actually initially bought it to just fill in some of the holes that you couldn't see with the LiDAR. But then we very quickly realized that a thing called photogrammetry was becoming mainstream as well. And actually you could create the points and build the 3D model without actually using the LiDAR. So the LiDAR sort of disappeared into the cupboard. And now we're pretty much at the position now where we still have a couple of LiDAR systems, but we pretty much exclusively use the drones, and most of the models you're going to see today were collected using drones. And I'll talk about what we do and how we collect them and everything like that as we go. So basically, this has been a sort of talk, or it's almost like half a career, but it's been 20 years or so in the making. So around about 2015, as I say, we first started working with drones, and we've been working with virtual outcrops, and everybody was pretty much ignoring us. And then around about 2015. We saw what we called the democratization of virtual outcrops. So up until that point, you needed, a very expensive LiDAR system, or a kind of, you needed to build a drone or something, and generally it just wasn't accessible for the majority of people. But then around 2015, two parallel things happened. The first was that the kind of DJI, a company called DJI, launched a whole range of drones, which are just amazing, because they're very cheap. You can get one for less than £1,000, or you can get a really good one for sort of a little bit more than that. So compared to the LiDAR and everything, they're very, very cheap. And also, and they're easy to fly, and they've got 20 megapixel cameras. They take great pictures, all this sort of thing. So literally anybody could do that, and they could buy one, and they could fly it, and they could start collecting their own data. The second thing that happened was that this software, well, a bunch of different softwares, but the main one's probably a thing called Agisoft, Metashapes, that these softwares appeared. And these softwares, again, meant that pretty much anybody, with a standard laptop, could build these models. So you'd fly your drone around, stick the photographs, take a couple of hundred photographs, stick them into Metashapes or whatever, the software you chose to use, and it would basically spit out a reasonable 3D model. And that changed everything, because all of a sudden, we were no longer like one of the few groups in the world working with virtual outcrops. Everybody had virtual outcrops, and that made things a lot more interesting. So we had easy to fly UAVs. A UAV is an unmanned aerial vehicle. Sometimes we generally just call them drones. Simple to use software, the standardized workflows, and the data can be processed on a standard laptop. Then there are interpretation softwares like Lime or VRGS that actually allow you to work specifically with these data once you've built your models. And something I'm going to talk about now is public sharing and putting these models into the, actually being able to share them over the web. So because everybody now has access to build and create virtual models, we decided that it was time to sort of share what we were doing and allow other people. So we built a site called V3Geo, and we were planning it anyway before lockdown, but we launched it sort of just as lockdown, as the global pandemic kicked off, and everybody was frantically looking for sort of resources to run their own virtual field trips. And I'm actually going to sort of show you give you a little bit of a live demo of it in a sec. But it's basically a database that contains about close to 300 now models from around the world. And as I say, we're encouraging other people from externally to submit to it. So basically, it's the idea is ultimately we'd love to have pretty much all of the world's really good outcrops stored in there and accessible to anybody. It's available for anybody to use for non-commercial purposes. So basically, if you're teaching or doing research and things, you can just go to it and use the models as you want. It's built to sort of include. It's got a data standard that allows you to sort of actually have search tools that go with it. So you can see here, I can search for clastic sedimentology or intrusive igneous rocks. I can filter on the type of depositional environment, and I can search for basins and places in the world and things like that. And as I say, data are available for non-commercial use to anybody to use. And one of the key things is that anybody who loads a model up there retains the rights to that model. It's their model. We're just providing them the resources for them to share it with a wider community. But we're not taking your models or anything like that. They're your models, and you can do as you please with them. So basically, this is this is just a page out of V3Geo. And literally, this is just a random outcrop I've chosen in Spain. There's a picture of the outcrop, a brief description, and then just the metadata and things, and some sort of information as to who it was collected by and everything. You can embed them into your own website if you want to do that as well. And and basically, there's a sort of whole there's a whole ecosystem sort of evolving. We've also we've recently launched, because we actually have to pay for all this, it's all stored on the cloud. So we've also recently launched private user space where you can put your own models, but you have to pay if you don't want to share them with the wider community. So that's something that's we've recently added that we're hoping will generate a little bit of income to pay for all the the upkeep and the running of the site. So that's the viewer, but let me just kind of escape out of here, and I'll just show you it live. So that's that's the front page of V3Geo, and basically you just click find a model, and you literally there you can see that there's now 250 models in there, and you can pretty much you can go anywhere you want. You can search on the map, you can see where the models are on the map, and you can see what models are there. You can search on the list. You can search by the name if you know what model you're looking for. There's Kilt Rock up in Skye, and then basically you just click on there. You launch that. Bit of a description. You can put links if you upload a model. You can put links to your papers or whatever there if you want to. And basically, when I click on that, it just launches it live. And it's obviously a little bit slow now because I'm also on Zoom, but basically, that's Kilt Rock in Skye. If you know that, it's a famous sill, and it's just taking a little bit of time to load up. But basically, when it loads up, you'll see there's a very nice waterfall and some really nice basalts there. And basically, as I say, you can use this. You can use this for research. You can use it for teaching. We use them quite extensively now, just in our day-to-day classes. Showing people this is what a sill looks like, this is what a fold looks like, and so on. And if you just if I stop moving around and give it a little bit of time to load, you'll see the resolution's pretty good. It's a pretty nice, clean model. So that's kind of V3Geo, and as I say, anybody can load models up there, and we actively encourage anybody now who's collecting them to sort of load them up and share them. So that's V3Geo. Let me jump back to now let's talk a little bit about virtual field trips. So one of the key things we do with our virtual outcrops is we run virtual field trips, and obviously, as I said, that's been very topical in recent times because people can't go to the field. So you can run your virtual field trip directly from just looking at it in V3Geo, but we also have a software that was developed by my colleagues in Bergen, Simon Buckley et al., to specifically allow you to sort of work with and do more detailed work, so you can actually map things and measure things. And you can also, as you can see from this image, you can also augment the virtual outcrop with other information like panels and photographs and all sorts of other stuff. And I'm going to sort of take you on a bit of a virtual field trip. So we use this to sort of run our field trips in. So a virtual field trip is a digital recreation of a field trip, or you know, on a computer or in a tablet. And there is a wide variety of types and audiences and things. And we've, as I said previously, we've been doing a lot of research recently, trying to sort of work out what's the best ways to deliver this, what works well for some, you know, different types of communities, whether it's school children or undergraduates or postgraduate students or industry professionals. And there is different ways of delivering the information. Most of the trips we run are done in real time. So we will literally say to the students, field trip starts next week. We're going to be working, you know, digitally from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock, and we'll just run it like we would run a regular field trip. You know, we'll go and visit a locality, we'll give them an exercise, we'll break them off into rooms, breakout rooms, they'll go and work together. The demonstrators will drop into the rooms, and then they'll come back and present what they've been doing, and so on. So it works quite similar, in a quite similar way to regular field trips, and we found that's been quite successful with the master students, at least. So, and you know, the range of goals and the learning outcomes are basically very, very similar to sort of traditional trips. But I'm going to take you on one, and then I'm going to look at a little bit of research that just sort of says how they compare to traditional trips. But we'll come back to this question after I've taken you on a virtual field trip. So this is Line. This is our software. Just move in there. So basically, so we're going to go on a virtual field trip. So this is a virtual field trip to Utah. So and so we're in the software now. It might look like PowerPoint, but actually everything is in 3 dimensions, so I can move around it, move around the space. And I've got this kind of timeline down here where I sort of move through the timeline. I've also got this annoying zoom thing in the way here. Get rid of that. There we are. Yeah. So basically, so we're going to go to the Western US. So this is the Western US. The state of Utah is here. It's this square with the top corner missing. And we're going to zoom into this area around in here, which is the Butte Cliffs. And this is a really famous place for studying shallow marine and coastal plain type sediments. We're going to go back to the Cretaceous. So this is the Campanian paleogeography for that area. You can still see the state of Utah there. But at this point, there was some subduction along this margin, what's now a kind of strike-slip margin. There was subduction all along this margin. There was a thrust belt developed in here called the Sevier orogenic belt. And there was a large fallen basin that ran down the middle of America. That fallen basin was flooded into a kind of intercontinental seaway. And the deposits that we're looking at were basically laid down. They were eroded off of this mountain and laid down on this western edge of this seaway here. And these systems were basically prograding out through time. So we're going to look at a sort of prograding clastic wedge that was deposited during the late Cretaceous. So the area, as I say, we're going into is called the Butte Cliffs. So this is a view that's about 120 kilometers across. There's a little town down here called Green River, which is where we generally stay. There's another town up here called Price, or 2 of them, Price and Helper. And that cliff line, there's a near continuous cliff line that runs all the way along here, largely in a depositional dip direction. So going from kind of onshore, paleo onshore to paleo offshore, dip direction for about 40 kilometers, strike direction for about 60 kilometers, and then another dip profile. And that actually carries on all the way across into Colorado. So it's fantastic outcrops, and there's almost no faulting, and it's very easy to trace and work with all the sort of beds and things that we see there. Geologically, there is a large anticline down in here with Triassic and even some Permian rocks in. The stuff that we're interested in is basically this green outcrop belt here, and that's the Cretaceous strata. That's the stuff that we're sort of interested in. If we were to put a cross section through this from the Cretaceous, basically this is the gray is offshore shales, mudstones, which is this stuff that comes out in purple on this satellite image. The yellow are shallow marine deposit shore faces, which we're going to sort of look at. And then the green is the coastal plain or the swamps that sat behind those beaches. And then the red is a big fluvial unit that comes over the top. But overall, this system was sort of building out into the basin through time. That section, as I say, is about 100 50 kilometers wide, and it's about 500 or 600 meters in thickness. And it's basically these sandstones that make up the cliff line as you go around the section. A modern analog for this system would be this delta down in this delta down in Brazil. Basically coastal plain, rivers coming across the coastal plain, shore faces out here going out into a sort of shallow marine offshore setting out in there, and you know, those shorelines were basically migrating through time, generally in an easterly direction. So we're going to go down to the southern part of the Butte Cliffs here to start with, and again, this is just another cross section. This is just a little bit more of a detailed one. We don't necessarily need to so worry too much about the details. But one thing about this is I worked on this with a guy called David Hodgetts, who was also in Liverpool quite a few years ago, and we built some synthetic seismic of this outcrop. So we really wanted to close that loop between what do you see in the cliffs and what would you see in the seismic. So this is a synthetic seismic of that. So that all that kind of fascist architecture is sort of captured in this synthetic seismic in here. So, and that's massively vertically exaggerated. The cliffs here are about 200 meters high. If we take it down to a 1-to-1 scale, you basically, you know, you can basically see that there are, you know, that's what the seismic would look like for this cliff line. And yeah. Now, the other beautiful thing about the Butte Cliffs is actually there are some wells that have been drilled, proper wells that have been drilled behind the cliffs for oil exploration. So this is our first virtual outcrop that we're going to look at. And this is a well that was literally drilled just behind just on the plateau up here. The actual well site is just there. So you know, we can literally shift this well and put it in front of the cliff and really sort of close that loop. Oh, excuse me. Close that loop to sort of really show what would these rocks look like in the subsurface. So we're going to use them as an analog. Oops, struggling a little bit. We're going to use them as an analog to say, you know, this is what shore faces and shallow marine systems look like in the subsurface, but we can actually also see them in the subsurface. And you can see that's the offshore shales down there with the higher gamma ray. These benches, these erosive benches are made up of sandstones. There's a little bit of coal and coastal plain material towards the top. And one of the beautiful things about this place in here, this exercise in here, is we can actually take a couple of those wells and we can do a correlation exercise. So we're going to just correlate two wells over a distance of about 6.5, 7 kilometers. And this is an exercise that we get the students working on. And I'm not going to sort of make you guys do it now, but this is kind of an interesting exercise, because ultimately, you know, you put these two wells close together, you get them to imagine they're looking at subsurface data in Petrel or whatever modeling package they're using, and you tell them to correlate, and basically everybody says, oh, there's a big shale there and a big shale there, let's join those two shales up, and there's a bunch of these upward cleaning sandstones here, let's join all them up, and everybody feels really kind of confident with their interpretation. And we can put some fascies onto there and say, well, there's the gray is the offshore, the yellow is the coastal plain, and is the shore face rather, and everybody feels confident about that. The really interesting thing about this, though, is because we have the virtual outcrops here, we can actually then force them to trace that correlation out. And if I just actually kind of go and look at the cliffs, this is a thing called Battleship Butte here, because it looks a bit like a battleship. And that first log section, the first log basically comes from here, and the sand at the top of that is a unit here called the Kenilworth, and it's basically this sandstone here. That's about a 30-meter thick sandstone there. So we can actually just measure the sort of the thickness of the sandstone. That's 25 meters. So it's the sandstone is almost 30 meters thick. But actually, you know, we can trace that sandstone all the way around. It's basically this one that we were looking at previously in this view here. So it's that one there. So far, so good. And as we trace it, we realize that actually, we trace it for a couple of kilometers. Actually, we trace that, we trace it, we're still tracing it, and suddenly that one is actually sitting at the bottom of the cliff, and the nice clean sandstone is now the one at the top. And if you work in an oil company and somebody shows you this, it's very, very scary, because what you suddenly realize is that, you know, a lot of your correlations potentially have been incorrect. And those two nice clean sandstones, so we basically just demonstrated, because it's oriented in a depositional dip direction, because we're going offshore, that basically that sandstone is those scrappy shales down there. And we've used this as an analog with oil companies. And there are a number of oil companies who've got reservoirs that have production problems, where they are injecting into this sand here, the equivalent of this sand here, and wondering why it's not pushing the oil out of here. And it's basically because there's a big thick shale in the way. So there's a kind of interesting lesson for people to take away there. We can also take these virtual outcrops. We obviously, you know, we go out traditionally. We've spent a lot of time out here measuring sections and things like that. But we can also convert all of that data into reservoir models. So this is a very large reservoir model built in the Petrel modeling software, and basically it just captures the geometry of these shore faces again. So the grey is the offshore, the brown is the transition zone, the yellows are the various shore faces. There's an estuarine unit at the top. And we can actually sort of use all this virtual outcrop data, map it all out to sort of really demonstrate the scales of these sorts of things. We can compare that system again to a modern system. Again, this is at the same scale. This is the Paraiba del Sul Delta overlain on there. There's the estuarine system at the river mouth. You know, there's the shore face architecture. There's the shore faces coming off of the edge there, the offshores offset out here. And if I lay onto that a medium-sized Brent field, so this is a Brent group field, this would be a good analog for the Brent group in the North Sea. You can see that kind of area that we've just modeled is a similar sort of scale to I think this is an 800 million barrel field. It's not the biggest, but it's a medium-sized oil field. So we can literally sort of demonstrate, we can use this technology, and this is something that's much, much easier with the virtual outcrops and actually being out there, is really to get a feeling for you know, the scale of these systems with respect to modern systems, and also sort of outcrop analogs. So I'm gonna just jump over. So now we're just going to go and look at another canyon. We're just slightly west of where we were, slightly east of where we were. And this is a kind of nice, cool section, because we've got a lot of information from this canyon. There's actually, again, there are wells drilled behind the canyon. And this contains a sort of another one of these estuarine units. And we can look at that in a little bit more detail. We can also just generally explore the canyon. There's some quite nice Indian petroglyphs here. Those are the minibuses from one of our field trips. You can actually see some really nice Indian petroglyphs sitting, you know, on that rock face there. The wells have this well actually has some core, so we can sort of we can get the students looking at the core photos, although that's not a core photo. Yeah, so yeah, we can get the students looking at the core and comparing it directly to the outcrop, and these are the sorts of exercises that we would set. We can sort of drop in a bunch of photos. So people will often say, you know, oh well, you know, you can't really touch the rocks, you can't hold the rocks, but you know, we can drop in these photos and give people a much more sort of closer, better impression of what these things look upright. Look up close, and you can see here in this case there's some nice sort of tidal cross-bedding and some tidal heteroliths in there. This is Randy. Randy's the geologist out of South Park. We've decided he's 1.8 meters tall, and we sort of generally drop him around just to give you an idea. So that's a 1.8 meter tall person. Gives you a sort of idea of the scale of a person with respect to the outcrop, because that's one of the things. It's really easy to lose your understanding of what scale, you know, what scale these things are actually looking at. So yeah, and then there's just various other photos that we've dropped in here. And generally we would let the students spend time sort of exploring that. Here you can see a shore face with a coal underneath it, sort of overlying some large scale inclined tidal heteroliths. So it's another one of these sort of estuarine systems. Again, we will often link it to a modern analog to try to sort of close that gap between the modern and the ancient. So this is the outcrop that we were just looking at, and that's about 1.5 kilometers, that virtual outcrop model in length. And this is the Barmouth estuary on the North Wales coast. And you can just see that basically, you know, we were looking at those large tidal heteroliths, and you can now see that the kind of environment, the modern environment that those large tidal heteroliths would have been deposited in a sort of big intertidal sinuous channel. So again, it's kind of trying to help people visualize what this area would have actually looked like back in the day. And yeah, and then we can sort of overlay onto that as well, and interpretation showing the supratidal, the intertidal, and the subtidal channels and things, just to try to sort of bring that. But it really shows the scale of that outcrop with respect to the scale of the depositional system. And similarly, we will often sort of, you know, build 3D models. This was a master's project for one of our students a few years ago, you know, and this is a sort of very detailed model in Petrel, capturing all the details and the architecture of that kind of incisional surface into the shore face and those inclined heteroliths that we were looking at previously, just back in there. And yet the students will do various kind of experiments, and we can sort of also overlay the, you know, we can overlay the sort of Petrel models and things onto the outcrop. So you can actually see that's the Petrel model now draped onto the outcrop, showing you know what you would see and how it relates to the subsurface. And then finally, just to sort of show you things work at a number of different scales, we go all the way down to you know, this is a oh, I know, it's not gonna bear with me. So that's literally just a hand specimen. So people will often say, "Oh, you know, we're not able to sort of see the rocks up close and personal." Well, you know, there's actually a hand specimen sort of you can actually sort of look at, and you can literally zoom right in and see the sort of, hang on, let me just turn off the other models. There we are. So there's a hand specimen that you can literally sort of rotate around and explore and see the various see the detail of. And then finally, we actually sort of oh, hang on. So that, yeah, there's our sandstone. So that's yeah, you can actually see the detail. You can, you know, literally, it's not quite as nice as holding it because you don't have that tactile experience, but you can sort of look at the hand specimen, and that could be any type of rock. You know, that could also be fossils and minerals and things like that. We can sort of also link that then into thin section images. Oops, I've double clicked there. We can go and have a look at that in you know, that's just a photo micrograph of that sandstone. And then finally, we can also sort of just go in and we actually built a 3D model using the SEM. So now these are the individual sand grains, and you can see the sort of clay coats on some of them. You can see the porosity. You can see that a lot of them are quite angular. And that's actually because there's quartz overgrowths and things in here. So this idea of using this software, we can literally go from the very big scale, looking at the whole of the US, you know, and looking at the basin and looking at sort of seismic scale analogs, all the way down to sort of looking at things on the micron scale. And we will set students work and exercise and things like that as we go along the way. So that's kind of all I was going to show for a virtual field trip. But just to sort of finish up, I was just going to show you the classic question we're always getting is, how do these compare to real field trips? It's not as good as the real thing, is it? Blah 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 blah. So basically, we've done a bunch of analysis to sort of look into these things and try to understand how do they compare. We've probably run, well, with our students, we probably run a total of about 50 days of virtual field trips now, and we collect data to sort of see how they interact and to see how they enjoy it and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to look at two specific virtual field trips. One of them is to the Pyrenees, the Spanish Pyrenees, which looks at kind of compressional tectonics, fallen basins, and deep water systems. And then the other one is to Utah. You've just seen a short part of it. But basically, it covers everything from extensional tectonics, salt tectonics, and rift basins, and looks at fluvial, shallow marine, and aeolian systems, and igneous rocks as well. So that one normally runs for 12 days in the field, and this one normally runs for 6. Rerunning them, you save quite a lot of time using virtual field trips, so we run them over 5 days and 10 days accordingly. And basically, we've run these things twice now through the pandemic. We run them real time, tutor led, 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock. And basically, we're using a platform called Blackboard, which is that's the kind of university's delivery mechanism. Most of it is run in line. The software you saw earlier, or some bits are done in Google Earth, and everything is basically problem based. You know, it's like we set exercises and things, and the students do exercises and then report back. And you can see that the Utah one used 30 separate virtual outcrops. I think you just saw about 3 virtual outcrops. There's 30 virtual outcrops in the Utah one. The Pyrenees one is 9. And you just see the statistics for the number of photographs and digital terrain models and all that sort of stuff that's included. Then this is obviously a very busy slide, but we sort of we get the students, we do an analysis, and we have 2 different types of analysis. One is a specific questionnaire that looks at every day on the field trip and tries to assess what they've learned and whether they enjoyed it and all that. But then we've also used the university standard course evaluation forms. And the reason for using these is they're less specific, but we have this data for the real world field trips going back like 5 years. So we can actually then directly compare the same trip, different cohort, obviously, but the same trip from the virtual into the sort of into the other world. And we also looked at what the staff sort of thought. So the first thing was, you know, for the detailed virtual field trip thing, I felt like I've learned new things. I understand exploration, and this would change every day. But basically, you know, the feedback is generally very, very positive. 5 is good, 1 is I disagree. And generally overall, you know, for both of these field courses, the feedback is very positive. The students liked having it run in set groups, and most of them liked the group work. Some of them prefer to work on their own, but most of them preferred working in groups. That was all positive. IT solutions, I won't spend too much time on this, but basically the fact that they're disagreeing here, we're saying, would you like training in the software? They thought it was relatively intuitive and they didn't need training. Basically, yeah, they thought Line was a good tool. They thought Blackboard was fine, all that. That was all sort of pretty positive. And then this becomes interesting because, you know, I learned things on the virtual field trip I wouldn't have learned on a normal field trip. Sort of most of them are agreeing with that. Not all of them. But the majority of them feel that they did learn things that they wouldn't have otherwise learned. Most of them would still rather be on a normal field trip, and most of them would definitely rather be in Utah or the Pyrenees. And this is obvious. You know, it's like the reason people like going on holiday is because they like traveling, they like going to different places. Most geologists, not all, but most geologists like being outside and all that sort of thing. So it's not surprising that everybody would rather be in Utah. But the interesting thing is that they are learning stuff that they wouldn't have otherwise learned. And yeah, now using the university's course evaluation forms, this is even more interesting because the cohort who basically, you know, this is the older cohort who did things in the real world, and this is the cohort up here who did things in the virtual world. Actually, they thought the teaching was more effective virtually than in the real world. They also actually, these guys, maybe they were starved of kind of interaction and everything, but they actually enjoyed the course more than the people who went to Utah or Spain, which is really quite kind of surprising. And they actually gave it, you know, in terms of what they'd learned and their employability and their graduate attributes, again, it's actually more positive for the virtual trips. And we did not expect this. This was really surprising. It was more positive for the virtual trips than for the for the real world field trips. So they'd all still rather go to Utah, but they'd rather go to Utah because it's an amazing place. But in terms of learning, arguably they're actually learning more and they're enjoying the course more from a learning perspective, the virtual course. And overall, the staff feedback was that they felt that the learning outcomes, you know, we felt that we'd satisfied the learning outcomes, and we actually thought that, you know, in some respects, that the delivery mechanism has significant advantages. So just to summarize those advantages, I think you've seen, there is an ability to change scale. very, very quickly. You know, you drive into a canyon in Utah and you are basically in a canyon, and it's very, very hard to perceive how things relate to one another and to get the big picture. Whereas with the virtual trip, we can do that very, very quickly. We're not impeded by logistics. We can follow, we can visit the canyons or the stops in the most logical way. We don't go to an outcrop and say, well, you know, remember what you saw yesterday, and it fits in with this, and this fits in with this bit of the story. We can go back and forth. We can zoom around and go to a canyon as many times as we want and look at different parts. The other thing is we're not spending time. We've kept a track of how much time we spend traveling on these field trips. And generally, in a typical day, it's 50% of the time is spent either in a minibus or a car or walking up a hill, or down a hill. Whereas, you know, in the virtual field trips, we save all of that time. The other thing is that people are much more much more spatially aware. You know, the students, they go to the field, we take them out, we show them some rocks, and then they all climb back into the minibus, they plug in, they fall asleep, whatever, and they wake up 20 minutes later, half an hour later at the next stop. This way, you know, everybody is kind of much more aware, and it's much more obvious how everything sort of fits together and how it all relates. There's no doubt they're easier to plan and deliver. We're not kind of booking hotels and car rental and all of that, and flights and all that kind of thing. There is an inclusivity issue here. You know, it's obviously for people, it's expensive to go to Utah or Spain, and also if people have sort of physical or social issues that they're not so kind of fit and things, obviously we can be much more inclusive with the virtual field trips. It's more time efficient, as I've said, because we're not spending half of our lives sitting in cars. It's good from a carbon perspective. We're not flying 20, 30 students to Utah. And it's more flexible with, you know, in between other time commitments. You know, it literally, you turn up, you teach, and you're sort of back home in the evening. And the good thing is that students, you know, we make the trips available. Students can go back and revisit them at any point and they want. You know, if they when they're revising or when they're doing whatever, they can actually go and revisit all of the stops and you know, the stuff. It's not just their notes; they can actually redo all the exercises. Disadvantages, as you saw, I showed you Randy in one of the pictures. You know, that's kind of that's the sort of thing we have to do, because you can actually lose your perception of scale very, very quickly. I mean, I've been looking at these virtual outcrops for years, and I know the book cliffs very well, but still, if I spend a winter working on virtual outcrops and then I suddenly go back to the field, I'm always thinking, blimey, that cliff is bigger than I remember. So scale perception can be difficult. There's no doubt anybody who's been teaching for the last year will tell you that basically talking to a blank screen for hours on end is fairly soul destroying, where everybody's kind of sitting often with their cameras turned off and things like that. So it can be that respect is more challenging for staff. We lose the social cohesion. You know, especially if we have a group that doesn't have pre-existing friendships and things like that. You know, basically everybody's in their own bedroom or their own home office or whatever, and we don't have that kind of that team building and that bonding thing, which can be really important. And there is a loss. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. I love being outdoors. I love traveling, you know, and I love Utah and I love Spain, you know, and it's definitely a shame to not be able to do that. It's definitely a loss. And there is also, I mean, you know, we're talking specifically here about taking people on a virtual field trip. And these are master students. They've already been trained in field work, so they know the observations to make and things like that. So they're not getting that kind of traditional field training, although we've got that sort of stuff going on in other respects. So basically, just one last slide. I think, you know, in the future, these virtual field trips are here to stay. The genie will not go back in the bottle now. We're already seeing it with universities and companies that we sort of work with. What we're hoping for is we've learned a lot about delivering these things in the last 2 years, and actually we think that there is a blended approach. We think we can do both. We can take them on virtual field trips, and we can also take them to the field and try to get the best of both worlds. And you know, one of the ways we're experimenting with doing that is literally taking tablets and things into the field, so you can actually have the same experience. You can be in the field looking at the rocks, but you can also have that larger spatial understanding. And what we do already is, you know, even before lockdown and things, we would often sort of revisit bits of the field trip or visit bits of the field trip before we go virtually, and we would revisit it when we got back. So that. And I think, you know, the final thing is that basically, you know, I was presenting a similar talk to this at a GeoSoc special meeting recently, and everybody's sort of complaining and everything about, you know, virtual training and everything, and virtual field trips and how it's going to destroy geology. And my analogy is really, you know, if you get into a plane today, you know, that the person flying your plane has probably done hundreds, if not thousands of hours on a simulator, so that when they actually sit down to fly that plane, there's still nuances for them to learn, but that simulator has actually made the learning process for them way quicker. And I think that there is an issue around this. We can teach people a lot of the key things and a lot of the key messages we want them to take away from all of this. We can do that with the virtual field trips, and then when we actually make our time that we do go to the field much more productive and much more positive. So yeah, so that's it. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And I've probably talked for a little bit too long, so I'm sorry about that.
Hi, John. That was insightful as ever, and I don't mind that you've overrun because I thought that was amazing.
Thanks, mate.
You kind of answered my question in there, which was going to be, so do you think virtual field classes are here to stay? But
sorry, no, yes, I mean,
but I just want to,
go on.
I just want to expand on that. So it's all very well for the master's students who've got experience of field work. What about over the pandemic? Did you use the same sort of techniques for people who were doing their first year and second year training, so mapping techniques and things like that?
Yeah, so we've used similar techniques, but I mean, I don't have that much to do with with undergraduate teaching, but I have passed a lot of this on, and Jess, who's a postdoc with me, she's doing a lot of kind of the research on this, and she's sort of she works a lot more with the undergrads and things. And I mean, there are different ways of running trips. So the University of Leeds and I think Imperial are building like these real world, like immersive world things where literally, you know, you have to walk on screen for 5 minutes to get from one outcrop to the other, and there's birds and there's planes going overhead, and to try and give that kind of immersive feeling. So I think, you know, I don't know whether they pour water over people's heads to simulate being in North Wales, but literally I mean, I think there are different ways of kind of running virtual field trips, and I'm still not convinced that, you know, you can ever get away from ever going to the field, but I do think you could probably train people to make better observations and things, so that when they do. The other thing is, a lot of this stuff is like Jess, especially with she was running a first year course. You know, she literally, like, she wants to show the first years a fold. She just pulls up a fold in V3 Geo and gets them to sketch it. And they're not just sketching a picture, they're actually navigating and flying around it. So I think, you know, it can be used to augment all of that sort of thing as well all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly our experience from last year as well, sure. With some of the things that certainly Alan and myself actually put together. Right. We've got a question from Chris.
Yeah, John, really nice talk. I guess I want to probably make a comment on the virtual field trips by virtue of COVID have acted as emergency replacements of traditional field trips. But I mean, surely you don't need you've sort of hinted at it, but they were never designed to replace field trips, right? They were designed to do things that you can't do in the field. Mm-hmm. And so I think perhaps the reaction to them is that we've had to emergency replace real field trips with these. But I think going forwards, you're absolutely right that quite just augment a traditional field trip with the ability to, you know, have satellite images dropped in and zoom in and out, you know, deploy modern analogs as you see fit. I mean, what's not to like? But how you do that and keep the trip the same sort of in the same time frame is that's a pretty difficult sort of.
Yeah, I mean, we've got lots of ideas. I mean, one classic one will be, augmented reality is becoming is becoming a reality. And whether it's Google glasses or whatever, or whether you hold up a tablet, but if you can, how many times have you stood on a field trip going, right, see the layer there? No, the one by the green tree by the big boulder. We'll follow that along. No, the layer above that. I mean, imagine if you could just hold up a tablet and the instructor clicks a button and the stratigraphy is immediately displayed on top of the outcrop for you.
Yeah, it'd be pretty amazing. Yeah.
Or a synthetic seismic or a reservoir model or a well log is just dropped on top of it. So I think those are the sorts of things that we're interested in, and I think that just makes that will make the real world field trips much more kind of interactive and more immersive.
Yeah, fabulous. Nice work, John. Cheers.
Right, have we any more questions? I'd just like to make a comment though. John, your virtual field classes, they were run as a block. So you essentially went to Utah for a week.
Yeah.
So I think the experience that that you're showing through your analysis of the feedback from students is rather different from what we had. So what we did was we timetabled in whole day sessions within a normal working week. So Thursday was field day, and I think the approach of taking a full day might actually a full block, a full week might actually be a much more positive experience for the students, and that's why you're getting such good field work there, because you've got that momentum carrying on. So although the students appreciated what we did and some of it they enjoyed, I think there was that lack of momentum for each after each
that's
day.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone else would like to comment on that from Liverpool, if they thought the same sort of thing.
Well, it's also how you sell it, right? I think because depending on what the students expect, then they feel differently about what they experience, right? So,
sure. Yeah.
John, you said to them, right, we're going to do a virtual field trip. It's going to be a week long, and we'll do it like this, bam, 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 bam. Whereas if it comes in drips and drabs, as you say, Kath, that they don't really get into the field trip, and you don't get that social bonding that you were talking about, and you don't get that camaraderie, So maybe a big part of it is that. But I'm surprised that they loved it so much.
Yeah.
Not doing you any disservice, John.
No. I mean, we were happy. We were definitely very happy that the feedback was positive for sure. Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, interestingly, the students who probably should have done better because the trip was virtual didn't take advantage of the fact that they didn't have to go out into a field every day and get cold and wet and miserable. They decided that staying at home was a perfectly adequate place to stay miserable in some ways. But yeah, I mean, as you know, talking to that blank screen, it's soul destroying. And the feedback from our students was they wanted more social interaction, but they refused to put a camera on. And it's hard to work out how you or how that can be abridged in for want of a better word.
So I think, I mean, you're absolutely right there, John. I mean, I ran a virtual field trip 2 weeks ago for a major oil company, and it was a 4-day trip, and literally at no point did any of them ever turn their cameras on. I never saw them. And I mean, it was lit, and I was asking them, I was saying, if you're going to ask a question, if you want to talk, if you want to share some of your experiences, turn your camera on. And they would talk and everything, but none of them ever turned their cameras on. So that really soul destroying. But I think, I think that, with the students, it's much easier because actually sending them away to work in groups, and then you put them into breakout rooms, and then you drop into a breakout room and they're all in there with their cameras on, chattering away and everything, and you can just drop in and chat to them and work with them. So I think that's, you know, that's a good way, that's a better way of having them work in groups, just like you would in the field. You know, you break them out into groups and let them work and things, and yeah. And actually, I just ran the Pyrenees one. Our Pyrenees one, I literally last week, Adrian Hartley and myself ran it for the master students. The university said we weren't allowed to travel to Spain, but they're all back in the building now. So we actually ran it as a virtual field trip in front of them. And that was a completely different experience as well. And I'd forgotten how much I missed actually properly standing in front of people teaching, because you get all this micro feedback. You can see when they're bored, you can see when they're smiling, you can see when they're nodding or shaking their head, all that kind of stuff. And so that was a kind of different experience as well, and that was quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there with the virtual field class in a classroom. That's actually a much more positive experience.
Sure.
Just to cut in, I think we've run out of time for the stream, so I'll just end the YouTube stream now. But thanks everyone.